Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. Before we start, on behalf of all Vermonters, I want to take a moment to offer my condolences to the victims and families of last night's tragic accident in Washington, D.C. We don't know all the details, but we do know the lives of many families changed forever last night. Our heavy hearts and thoughts are with all involved in this incredibly difficult time. Today, we'll be talking about the final major policy bill we'll be proposing, which is focused on affordability. When I travel around the state, one of Vermonters' biggest concern is how tough it is to live here, and too often they even tell me they're considering leaving the state because it's just too expensive. To address our affordability challenges, we need to fix the broken systems and the underlying issues, not just fund them. That means creating more housing, making it more affordable to own and rent a home. And it means we have to transform our pre-K through 12 system while making sure every student gets a great education, no matter where they live. And Vermonters don't face a property tax increase year after year. As I said the other day, my budget follows through my commitment to prioritize affordability and common sense issues and solutions. Because if Vermonters can't afford the solutions, we can't achieve the goals, no matter how well-intentioned they are. Secretary Moore will talk more about our climate goals in a minute. But I want to be clear. We agree on the need to reduce emissions. But we need to be realistic about what we can do and make sure we're on a timeline that makes sense and doesn't harm Vermonters financially as a result. So, just like we did with clean water, I'll direct the Agency of Natural Resources to create a plan that outlines the steps needed to meet the 2050 goal, including how much it will cost. And being one of the highest tax states in the nation, we need to find ways to offer relief for those who need it most. That's why I propose a $13.5 million tax package that Commissioner Bolio will speak about in a moment. The bottom line is we need to keep affordability at the center of everything we do this year. Vermonters were clear in November. They've had enough. So we need to separate our wants from our needs and spend within their means. So with that, I'll turn it over to Secretary Moore.
Good afternoon. As the governor highlighted during his budget address on Tuesday, we will be pursuing changes to current climate policy this session, including the Global Warming Solutions Act and the Climate Superfund Act. I'm here today to provide a bit more detail about these proposals. First, we are proposing to eliminate the private right of action provisions in the Global Warming Solutions Act. Creating an accountability mechanism that rests solely with the courts slows progress, creates regulatory uncertainty, and delays work on the ground. The broad nature of the current provision has already drawn the first of many possible lawsuits. Ironically, in advancing specious arguments that we are not doing enough to address climate change, advocates are drawing taxpayer resources and staff time away from implementation and into the courtroom. Next, we're proposing to restructure the relationship between the Climate Council and state agencies by adjusting the composition of the council and the scope of its work. We believe there are significant opportunities to better align the work of the council with that of state agencies and make it more sustainable for the volunteer members who have repeatedly expressed concerns about their capacity to fulfill the current mandate. Additionally, our proposal would remove the council's authority to direct ANR to promulgate rules. Currently, the council could, for example, tell ANR to adopt an appliance efficiency standard or establish a low-carbon fuel standard, and we would be obligated to pursue those policies. Under our proposal, the council would make recommendations, but decision-making would be returned to the legislature and the governor about whether and when to engage in rulemaking. Third, we are committing to creating a workable plan that drives implementation. I've repeatedly heard legislators and advocates say, we can't go back on climate. And I don't think that means what they think it means. For example, we are currently investing nearly $45 million a year in weatherization. weatherizing more than 4,000 Vermont homes this year alone. This is a dramatic increase from just 5 years ago when we averaged closer to 1,000 homes a year, and pushing the limits of what is possible, both in terms of workforce capacity and homeowner readiness. However, to meet the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act, we would need to weatherize 7,000 homes this year and nearly 9,500 homes next year, requiring that we double current funding, to say nothing of having the people available to do the work. And this is but one piece of what is currently envisioned by the Global Warming Solutions Act. That should lead people to ask, how much will it cost to complete the work of the Global Warming Solutions Act by 2030 or by 2050? And the simple fact is, we don't know, but it will be substantial. Cost is one of the questions our plan will answer. We will also dig into how much of that need is being met with existing resources. In its most recent annual update to the General Assembly, the Climate Council documented more than $520 million in climate investments that were appropriated as part of the state's FY25 budget. Let that sink in. More than $500 million, with roughly 2/3 of these investments supporting greenhouse gas mitigation programs, and the balance helping our communities adapt and be better prepared for more extreme weather. This $520 million includes the $45 million for weatherization I spoke of previously, and also things like investing $20 million in EV incentives and publicly available charging infrastructure, as well as continuing the transition of state fleet to hybrid and electric vehicles, and investing $40 million in community resilience and disaster mitigation projects, which augments the $75 million Vermont received from FEMA for this work following the July 23 floods. Understanding the required investments and available resources will allow for a data-informed conversation about what is achievable and what is aspirational, and serve as the basis for determining how best to address the unmet needs. This is why the governor has directed ANR, in collaboration with the Public Service Department, VTrans, and other relevant state agencies, to prepare a companion implementation strategy to the Climate Action Plan by December 15th, 2026, which will evaluate what is feasible, how much it will cost, and propose a long-term funding strategy. To ensure continued strong investment in priority climate actions while state agencies undertake this work, the governor's FY26 budget recommend includes bridge funding. The bridge both utilizes one-time funds and expands on our important partnership with Efficiency Vermont by proposing to realign their mission to have more explicit focus on reducing climate pollution, which will in turn capitalize on their existing implementation infrastructure. During his address, the governor also mentioned challenges with the Climate Superfund law passed last session, also referred to sometimes as Make Big Oil Pay. Earlier this month, ANR and the treasurer jointly submitted a feasibility report that identified both needed changes to the existing statutory deadlines to better reflect the complexity of this work and additional resources essential to the success of the effort. I look forward to seeing these recommendations taken up by the legislature. And as the governor noted on Tuesday, we are already seeing legal challenges to this work. Absent a willingness on the part of the legislature to commit additional time and resources to what they have deemed a priority effort, it is challenging to envision a successful path forward for this work. In conclusion, I know the governor, the cabinet, and lawmakers all recognize that reducing greenhouse gas emissions and better preparing for extreme weather and other climate-related threats are among the most important jobs we undertake on behalf of all Vermonters. Unfortunately, the current construct established under the Global Warming Solutions Act is increasingly unworkable and actually cuts against these vital efforts. Past legislatures gave an appointed council power over state agencies, allowing them to direct regulatory action and demand spending, and established an easy path to sue the state. This approach was rejected by a majority of Vermont voters last fall. The alternative that the governor spoke to earlier this week, and I've helped detail here today, is responsive to that voter feedback. These adjustments do not delay progress. Rather, they support continued strong forward momentum without forcing unknown costs on Vermonters. This administration's commitment, oopsie. Extra tea.
Working together once again.
Thank you, Mr.
Channel 3's problem. Just to be sure.
Belt and suspenders.
Yes.
From the top.
The administration's commitment to climate action is evidenced by the daily efforts of dozens upon dozens of state employees involved in this work, and perhaps even more concretely by the more than $520 million that is being invested even as we speak. However, since the governor's address, a few advocates have attempted to politicize these changes by engaging in the easy and divisive game of political name-calling. It's regrettable they've defaulted to such a familiar and unconstructive approach, rather than heeding the clear call by Vermonters for their choice of elected leaders to return to the hard work of jointly building a plan for real and practical climate solutions they can afford. Thank you, and with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Bolio.
Thank you, Secretary Moore. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner. In his fiscal year 26 recommended budget, the governor is proposing a $13.5 million income tax relief package aimed at keeping more money in the pockets of working-class Vermonters and retirees to reduce poverty, enhance our workforce, and allow more seniors to retire with independence and dignity. I'm going to provide some additional detail on the 4 specific tax policies outlined in that tax package, including expanded exemptions and credits for families with children, working-class Vermonters, seniors, and military retirees. In the first of the 4 policies, the governor is proposing to expand Vermont's child tax credit to families with children up to age 6, where currently the credit is available only for families with children up to age 5. The Vermont Child Tax Credit provides a tax break for low and middle income families through a fully refundable $1,000 credit per eligible child. Child tax credits have a proven track record of reducing childhood poverty and providing greater stability for our households and communities. This expansion would continue Vermont's leadership among states in leveraging child tax credits to give young families a break and help provide a strong start for our youngest Vermonters. Second, the governor proposes that we expand Vermont's earned income tax credit. The earned income tax credit is a fully refundable federal tax credit and is often recognized as one of the most successful anti-poverty programs in the country. Currently, Vermont allows a credit equal to 38% of the federal credit for eligible taxpayers. This budget expands it to 100% of the federal credit for those filers without dependents. Third, the governor is proposing to expand the tax break for Vermont seniors by increasing the exemption for income tax on Social Security payments by $5,000. That would increase the threshold for the exemption up to a maximum of $65,000 of income for single filers and $80,000 of income for filers, for filers who are married and filing jointly. In 2022, the legislature expanded the income tax exemption on Social Security benefits, showing broad support for keeping Vermont affordable for seniors. However, inflation and rising costs mean that another adjustment is necessary, and this expansion will ensure that we continue to provide tax relief to retirees on a fixed income. When we discuss this expansion in Vermont, it's important to remember that as workers look to where they retire, they have their choice of 41 states that don't tax Social Security at all, including Vermont's regional neighbors of New Hampshire, New York, and Massachusetts. This proposal will help more Vermonters retire with independence and dignity and give them a little bit of extra breathing room when living on a fixed income. And the final proposal in the tax relief package is to fully exempt military pensions and survivors' benefits from Vermont state tax. Currently, Vermont has one of the weakest partial exemptions on military pensions in the country. With this exemption, Vermont would join the 35 states that don't tax military pensions at all. The Joint Fiscal Office has noted national data, that shows that over 70% of military retirees retire between the ages of 35 and 50. Individuals who could transition back to the civilian workforce with years of valuable experience gained through their military service. By not taxing military pensions, we would honor career military service while affirming Vermont as a state that welcomes and values military retirees in our workforce and our communities. You've heard the governor talk a lot about affordability, and keeping Vermont affordable for all Vermonters is at the center of this tax relief package. By expanding these established and proven programs, the tax relief policies in the recommended budget are designed to be a sound investment in Vermont families, workers, and retirees that all in are projected to provide a direct benefit to tens of thousands of Vermonters. Thank you. I'll hand it back to the governor.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll now open it up to questions.
Governor, more tax credits means less income, less revenue for the state? Is that an accurate statement?
I don't know what the magnitude of the tax credit
The
would be.
whole package is $13.5 million. The whole package combined is $13.5 million reduction to general fund revenue. Yep.
Governor, the Democrats, though, still hold the majority, will still set the agenda. Some of these ideas, like the military exemption, they said, well, we tackle that in years past. I guess, what is your sense that, you know, the majority will be willing to go along with some of these ideas, given that they also have their own stated priorities that are a little different?
Yeah, well, some of the tax credit proposals we're putting forward have been, I think they were devised by Democrats in previous administrations, not maybe this one nationally and so forth. And they are recognized as an anti-poverty tool. And so I think there's some excitement there. I think there's some willingness to listen. In terms of the military pensions, it's something that we've been working on for the last 8 years. They took one small step towards that. I think it was last year or the year before, but it wasn't enough. It's not enough to attract people to come and stay and retire here. So we need to do more. Obviously, we need to grow our workforce, and this is a logical option in doing so. It's not the entire answer by any means, but it's one step we can take, and to honor those who have served their country. So, as I understand it, I think there's a bill in the Senate that has 20 signatures on it. So that in itself, I think, tells a lot about the acceptance of military pensions, maybe going a little bit further than they went before.
Governor, in 2017, shortly after President Trump withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord, you said, we, Vermont, have reaffirmed Vermont's commitment to achieving the greenhouse gas reductions of the Accord, the Paris Climate Accord. I did so with confidence, knowing that my administration is committed to meeting our state's targets for carbon reduction and renewable energy. And I'm wondering why you were so confident making that commitment in 2017, and what's changed since then?
I think it is details that have changed in some respects. I talked about it in my budget address in terms of even how we measure some of the emissions. We should be following, using different metrics in terms of what our net gain is in terms of emissions versus gross. And things of that nature. So putting these arbitrary deadlines on hasn't helped us. We have to be realistic about what we can do. So we're committed to doing our part, but we have to do it at a pace and at a price we can afford. And I think we'll get there, maybe in the same amount of time, maybe even quicker, if we just accept that and be practical about it.
Just the use of the term arbitrary. In 2017, you didn't think that these were arbitrary deadlines. You thought that these were informed by international groups of scientists that were telling Vermont and other states and other countries, this is how much you have to reduce carbon pollution by.
By what date?
In order to, the dates in the Paris Climate Accord.
And
Which you voluntarily tied Vermont to. And 8 years on, you're calling those milestones arbitrary. And so I guess I'm just trying to reconcile the incongruence there.
Some of what I'm declaring as arbitrary are some of the deadlines we put in, some of the things we've done in terms of allowing special interest groups to sue us. I don't think that was in the Paris Climate Agreement. There's been things that have happened since then that have made it even more difficult for us to achieve our goals. So we're just saying, let's be realistic about this and practical, and we'll get there. Secretary Moore.
Sure. You know, I think one of the challenges, Pete, is the Paris Climate Accords are global reduction targets. And Vermont is in some ways in the enviable position and in some ways in the challenging position of really the work we need to do is in the hardest to decarbonize sectors. We have to change how we heat and cool our buildings and change the kind of vehicles we drive. We don't have a large coal-fired power plant that we can go to and work on a single source to reduce emissions. And the challenging nature of that work, the ability to come to scale, are things we've continued to grapple with. I think the governor makes some really important points. The clean heat standard was sort of undone, less so because of the structure of a clean heat standard, and more so because the legislature hitched it explicitly to achieving a 2030 reduction requirement. If they had stretched implementation out over time, as we've done with our work related to clean water, there are more options and tools available to us. But this unwillingness to step back and think about what it means to do something specific by 2030 and our long-term 2050 goal of decarbonization, I think is undermining some of the otherwise important policy discussions we could be having.
If you're talking to lawmakers about the proposed changes for the rulemaking authority for the Climate Council specifically, and they say to you, I can get behind this as long as you can give me an assurance that you won't use this new authority in the executive branch to withdraw from clean car rules, would you be able to give them that assurance?
I think that is a very hard question to answer given some of the rhetoric we are hearing out of the current federal administration. It is, I know that President Trump has asserted he will withdraw California's ability to issue the waiver that created the structure for the clean car standards. And I think there is so much uncertainty and moving pieces in that space right now, it would be very challenging to say anything at this moment.
But if the clean car exists right now, if it exists in its current form, survives all the legal challenges that will inevitably come, will Vermont remain a part of that rule?
We are committed to the program as it stands today.
Any thought, Julie or Governor, about trees? We have a lot of trees, and they eat a lot of carbon. Any thought about there are already private carbon things for trees? Any sense of that?
That, as the governor mentioned, one of the components of the proposal that I didn't speak specifically to today is to look at a net accounting standard. That is the way the U.S. Climate Alliance looks at greenhouse gas emissions. And so it both thinks about sources of emissions as well as sinks of emissions. And using a net accounting framework would allow us to take credit in some ways for our farms and forests and the important carbon sequestration work they are able to perform. I think it also allows us to place value on the important work that our farms and forests are doing. They're sort of our greatest climate asset, and right now when we are talking strictly about gross emissions reductions, we miss some of that value that they provide.
Interesting. Back to what Pete was asking about, there are car manufacturers in the building today who are saying that this essentially, I think it's a 3-to-1 ratio. You're either going to cap the amount of internal combustion cars that are sold, or you're going to be tying that to the amount of EVs sold. And that's going to play havoc one way or the other on the car industry. Is that a concern with using the California plan?
There are a lot of challenges right now, between challenging dynamics, I guess I should say, between manufacturers and dealers, and just over the overall administration of this program, complicated further by some of the rhetoric at the federal level. And it is challenging to unpack exactly where things sit today. Certainly the goal is never to not have cars on the lot for Vermonters to be able to purchase, and we're going to continue to work through that. But as I said to Pete, I haven't seen anything yet that would cause me to recommend to the governor a change in course.
Governor, many in the State House would also say healthcare is a huge driver of affordability concerns. Just yesterday, your predecessor, Governor Douglas, was up with others sounding the alarm bell. Can we expect a proposal or a bill or ideas from your administration this session about reining in the cost of healthcare?
Well, obviously, it's another segment of our affordability crisis, the cost of health care. And we have to prioritize something. everything can't be a crisis and not something we can address all at once. So we chose to move forward with housing and our demographics, but understanding at the same time, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, that we have to do something about healthcare as well. But keep in mind, I mean, we have a whole healthcare network. We have a Green Mountain Care Board. We have Blue Cross Blue Shield. We have numerous areas where they're working on this as well. We have a congressional delegation that's working on drug pricing, and this is not just a problem for Vermont, it's across the nation. So I think, again, we want to tackle housing, demographics, affordability, but that's one piece of it, and we'll continue to do our part in that regard.
You talk about walking and chewing gum at the same time. I think it's either tomorrow or maybe Monday, those budget cuts at UVM are set to go in. Mental health beds at CVMC, the beds in Burlington. So how, like, I guess, what is your confidence level, or what is your sense that, we can move the needle on affordability for healthcare without the healthcare system spiraling in the meantime and pricing people out?
Yeah, I'm confident that we'll come to some conclusion on that between the Green Mountain Care Board and the Health Network and others, and have a measured response to all the increased costs. But we all have to be willing to be at the table in order to do that, and we are.
Just to go back to EVs for a second, maybe for you or the Secretary, could you speak to the extent that there's funding for replenishing some of the EV subsidies in the FY26 budget proposal? My understanding is that it is in there, but it's a different funding source somehow. It's a little funky. Yeah.
Do you want to expand on that?
I can start, and then if one of my colleagues from the Department of Public Service wants to jump in. But the Regional Greenhouse Gas Emissions program, RGGI, generates revenue that comes to Vermont each year. This past year, revenue well exceeded our projections, and so there is several $1 million of one-time money as a result of that higher than anticipated performance that we are able to direct to electric vehicle incentives without reducing or otherwise impacting the place those dollars usually flow, which is into low-income weatherization programs.
Okay. And is that, if funding, I guess, how does that level of money compare to where the subsidies, I guess, before they ran out? Like, how does it compare in terms of the level of funding to what we had?
So I think there's a lot of things that we talk about when we talk about electric vehicles. And I know the Transportation Agency has indicated, I think in the current year, we're investing about $11 million. My understanding is we're slightly shy of that in terms of what sits on the line in the account that RGGI feeds into. But it's not just incentives, right? It's other components of that work as well. And would have to defer to others about the details of how they actually are proposing to allocate those funds across.
Governor, you've long talked about the need to find a more reliable user fee for EVs in Vermont. Your administration has been on the record supporting vehicle miles traveled to do that. Can you talk about next steps on that front for you?
As you know, we're implementing a piece of that at this point in time, but we're also looking to work on a national level with others. We aren't the only state that has to do something. This is a reality that the federal government has to realize as well. So we look forward to continuing to work with them, with my fellow governors on this throughout the country, as well as the federal government. But Secretary Flynn can probably give you more information as to where we're at this point in time in terms of collecting some of the money for EV users at this point and moving forward to try and determine next steps.
Right. I mean, it sounded, based on testimony in the House Transportation Committee last year, Secretary Flynn, that putting in place, being able to account for vehicle miles traveled was going to be a precursor to a state program to generate revenue off those miles traveled.
That's correct. Pete, there's two processes right now. Excuse me. January 1st, a fee went into effect for electric vehicle owners when they registered the vehicle, and that was considered to be an interim step between January 1st and when the mileage-based user fee program is instituted. The legislature authorized a study for a mileage-based user fee program, which we are reporting on right now, actually. And that program intends to capture annually through inspections the mileage that that vehicle has traveled, and then the fee would be based on those miles. So that plan is yet to be fully implemented, but in the interim, there is a fee that's currently now in place. And I can't quote you, I'm going to, let's just say it's around $135, and it was calculated to take into account what would a typical vehicle that travels 12,000 miles a year, that got an average mile per gallon, what would that have paid in fuel tax? And that's sort of the parameters around that number. So that's current right now. And then it's in place until the mileage-based user fee is fully implemented.
So will you be seeking authorizing legislation this year to get that miles traveled revenue source in place?
Yes, in subsequent years, yes. I mean, the legislature has agreed to the construct, the administration has agreed to the construct, the details are now being reported on. There may be some changes to the details based on the legislative process, but that's the intention.
So you're on board with Vermont having a state program to assess a fee on EV drivers based on vehicle miles traveled?
We're going to have to do something unless we continue down the same path as just giving a lump sum payment per year. Everybody has to pay a user fee of some sort to maintain our highways and infrastructure. But what I'm saying as well is this is a national issue because there's a federal gas tax as well that needs to be addressed because it's a federal trust fund where we dip into a lot of money in terms of trying to leverage. We have a small amount of money that we have to utilize to leverage bigger dollars from the federal government that isn't going to last forever if we continue down this path with EVs.
So do you want to wait for a federal program, or do you
No,
want
no, no.
to
I'm
do
just
this?
saying that we're moving forward with the will of the legislature on this, and we think this is the fairest approach at this point. But the feds have got to do something on their end as well. I mean, it doesn't contingent upon that, but we have to do our part to make sure EV owners are paying their fair share.
And that's something you want to do this session?
We'll give, again, this is all to the prerogative of the legislature, but we'll be presenting that and asking them to move forward.
Let's move to the phones real quick. Ed Barber, Newport Daily Express.
Yeah.
Ed?
There'll be a hearing in Orleans tonight, Orleans Village, about proposal to construct 50 units of manufactured housing, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, for sale at $100,000. Could you speak to this as an example of the effort that your administration is making to bring affordable housing to people at all different income levels?
Well, Ed, obviously, this is a major challenge for us. We know we need more housing. Applaud anyone who's coming up with initiatives to further that, solving that problem. Commissioner, are you aware of this up in Orleans, this issue, this development?
We know a bit about it. Yeah, we're aware of the effort. I think it's still pretty far from being ready to move forward, but I know that there's a proposal, and we'd support it. I mean, this is exactly the type of effort that we've been supporting with things like the Rapid Response Mobile Home Infill Program.
Okay, so is this you promote this around the state?
We are promoting these types of initiatives across the state, yes. And if it's the project in Orleans that I'm thinking of, I think there are some concerns amongst the town, and they'll have to work their way through it. But when they do, obviously, we want to be supportive, but they have to come to agreement locally before we can get involved.
Right. They're going to need to build infrastructure, lines, electric. Is the government support include grants to help make this affordable?
This proposal, and again, I'll let the Secretary or Commissioner talk about this a bit more, but yeah, our grant program is to help with the infrastructure needed to develop the housing that we need as well. So we think that that is a bottleneck for many. So we want to provide grants and funding to help alleviate some of the costs associated with housing.
Thank you.
And I can just add, because the governor is absolutely right, this particular project has not gotten to a point where they have come to us to tap into a particular program, but we do have programs in place that work with these sorts of initiatives. So the Manufactured Home Improvement and Repair Program is an opportunity for parks and throughout the state to access money for infrastructure, and also the infill initiative that I mentioned before is another resource where early on, whether it's laying new foundations or bringing in new homes, parks could access that. But this particular project has not reached to the stage where they've come to us for resources yet.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Back to the room.
It's National School Choice Week, which I didn't know until I got something from Americans for Prosperity. And they were saying one thing to celebrate on National School Choice Week is Governor Phil Scott's education proposal in Vermont. As we kick off National School Choice Week, they wrote, which highlights the importance of education freedom. We thank Governor Scott for his approach to education funding and his commitment to streamlining school governance. Are they right to be celebrating your plan as a victory for school choice?
What do they mean by school choice?
Where every student has access to learning options that help them succeed regardless of zip code or tax bracket.
Well, our proposal obviously is to make sure that every student has the same opportunities no matter what their zip code is, where they live. So if that's what they're talking about, they might be right.
So if we've got five regional governance entities, and the one I end up in happens to have Burn, let's say, or St. J Academy, will I be able to send my kid to an independent school now if I want, because they happen to be in my district?
I don't have the details of that, but I don't think there's going to be anything much different than it is today. The Burtons of the world have a capacity. The St. Johnsbury Academy has a capacity, and they take care of kids, students in their areas. So I'm not sure what that will mean, but obviously they can't exceed their limits either. There's just a limitation, just like there is today. Not everyone can go to Burton who wants to go today, I don't believe. Or maybe they can. Maybe they have capacity enough. I just don't know.
But you would, if I'm in Washington County,
Yeah.
and I'm in this big district now, can my kid go to either Harwood or U32 or Montpelier? Is that up to the parent now?
I think if they, well, I would say, again, we want to confirm this, but if you're in this area and you're going to, you would have, if U32 or Spalding or whatever schools are there have a program that your kid is interested in, you could send them there if there was room and there was room available for them to participate. I think that's the case in some respects in some areas of the state today.
So would the kids that currently go to the school get first crack at deciding whether they want to keep going
I
there?
don't have all those details, but happy to have somebody flush that out for you. But I don't know, and I'm not sure what group this is you're referring to, but it sounds like if you're talking about going anywhere in the state, I'm not sure that that's not what we're doing.
But within that, those are going to be some pretty big districts, right?
Yeah.
I have a bunch of schools to choose from.
Maybe, but if again, our whole premise here is to make sure that every school provides the opportunities at the same standards as the others, and the teachers are paid equally amongst all those schools, so that we provide for an atmosphere where there's parity with other schools. So I'm not sure that there'd be a reason for someone to want to go to a different school if we're striving to make sure they're all equal, right? An equal education for all kids in all parts of the state.
Governor, one of my readers was asking about your $9 billion budget with no new taxes or fees. How does this budget help Travis? Specifically, a 5% spending increase, which is above the 2.9 inflation rate. How is using tax surpluses, which are essentially overpayments by taxpayers, to subsidize increased school spending? Is that not just a tax shift?
Well, again, if we don't do anything, if we don't provide the $77 million for tax relief for the education fund, they'd be paying more. So I would say Travis would benefit from that. Travis might also benefit from the $13.5 million of tax relief that we offer as well. So he might also benefit from more housing that we desperately need to bring more people into the state, to broaden out the tax base, so we have more taxpayers, not more taxes. And so there's all kinds of incentives for us, investments that we'll make in different areas that we hope in time, it's not instantaneous, but in time will alleviate the tax burden on Travis.
Governor, the Secretary of State wants to roll back or eliminate inspections and regulations on racetracks, having spent many years at the site of excitement. What do you think?
Well, I think as long as they have the insurance, I think it makes sense. As long as they have insurance at the levels that they are supposed to have. The insurance companies they're pretty particular about what the expectations are in the safety situations at the different tracks. So I think it makes some sense, but I applaud her for at least taking a look at that.
You're not concerned. I know a few years ago there was like one of the bankings, one of the walls was a little lower than it should have been. There were bad cracks there. You're not concerned about potential public safety risks or anything?
No, as long as, again, as long as they have the proper insurance, because those insurance companies specialize in racetracks and so forth, and they have specifications that you have to adhere to.
If you were making your budget today, would it be any different based on what you've seen over the past week out of the White House?
I don't believe we'd be doing anything different than we're doing today. Obviously, nothing that we've heard a lot of rhetoric over the last week. We've heard a lot of rhetoric over the last few months, but we don't exactly know what it's going to mean for us until it actually happens. As I said before, we can't live through 4 years of chaos and turmoil, and so we can't react to every single issue that comes out of Washington. And I know that may be a strategy that the current administration is using, but from our standpoint, we will take it one at a time, and we'll figure this out, and we'll get through it one way or another. But in terms of our budget, I don't know what we do any different.
Your finance commissioner told House of Probes that, you know, the plain truth is we're not going to be able to backfill all the lost federal funding that we might see down the road. Is there a role, though, at least a limited role for the state to play in backfilling lost federal revenue that you think is especially?
Well, again, we'll address that when it happens, right? I mean, we have proven time and time again, we'll provide for Vermonters in the best way possible and based on the reality. And we'll work with the legislature to do that. But at this point, we don't know what that is. So we can't speculate, and we'll just have to address it when it comes our way.
Does the state get, like corrections, get requests from ICE saying, there's a guy we want, there's a immigrant we want who's in your prison, we'd like to get him? And if you do get those, how often does that happen, and what do we do? Detainers, I think is the word.
You mean somebody within our correction system?
Right.
I'm not sure that, I don't know. I'd have to ask somebody else about that because I'm not sure that we would release anyone from prison.
If the feds wanted them and said, we want to come get that person.
It would be at the end of their sentence.
Yeah, not while they're incarcerated, but at the end of their sentence, possibly.
Is that standard practice
I think that's
now?
been standard practice for quite some time.
Okay.
Are you aware of any federal actions that have had the effect of increasing immigration enforcement in Vermont since the president was inaugurated?
I haven't seen any at this point in time. Thank you all.